happened in the West, you look at all the folk tales, you look at all the fairy tales that are written, it almost looks like it's didactic in the beginning. Then it looks like it is all written with adult stuff in the mind. It was much later, in the 1600s only, they realized that children as a separate entity, and that's when children's literature came into existence. And Bhutan, now in this 21st century, we have just begun, and I feel proud to say that I have made my contribution by writing 12 different titles for children. Yeah, so maybe.
Thank you, Dr. Chadha. Now, we have touched a bit on traditional literature and a bit on contemporary Bhutanese literature. While the contemporary Bhutanese literature is growing, Dr. Karma, do you think that the growth in contemporary literature poses some threat of the conservation of traditional literature?
Yes, I would say. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Bhutan. How many of you been to Bhutan? Okay, quite a few of you. Bhutan, like many other parts of the world, is going through a serious transition right now. It has moved from, economically speaking, from a subsistence farming economy now fully onto a modern capitalist consumerist market economy. It has moved recently also from a medieval monarchy to a bicameral parliamentary democracy in terms of its political setup. It has also moved from a totally rural society. Okay? There was no town in Bhutan before 1960s. There was a capital, there was just a big fort that contained the headquarters of the government. But Bhutan was entirely a village community. But now you look at Bhutan, almost over 50% of the people live in urban settlements that are totally new. It's easy to build the urban infrastructure, buildings and roads and street lamps and so forth, but it's very difficult to cultivate the culture to maintain the support system you need to maintain a smooth urban life. And then Bhutan also has gone through a serious transition in terms of its cultural mindset. We moved from a very deeply nature-oriented society, a very spiritual society, to a modern scientific society. When people think of themselves or people around them, of the world, it's no longer about the immediate environment. It's no longer about the inner spirituality. We have a great deal of materialism and individualism and consumerism spreading across the country. So there's a major cultural shift in people's worldview and mindset. One transition that's relevant for this particular festival is the transition from an oral society to not a literary society, unfortunately. As I said earlier, until 1960s or so, Bhutan was largely oral. Maybe about 20% of people became monks or had elite schools, home schools to get literacy. But most of the people passed down things orally. But now with school education, the literacy rate has gone up, numeracy has gone up. But before we could cultivate the literary culture in the young people, the audiovisual world has come too soon, too fast, too strongly. So globalization, like the rest of the world, is also gripping Bhutan today. In even very remote corners of Bhutan, you have Facebook and Instagram and WeChat and WhatsApp. It's all over the country. So what we have really gone through is gone from an oral society directly to the audiovisual society or audiovisual sort of global membership without developing the sound literary face, the literary culture. And what our education system, which we adopted from India, because at that time, in the 1960s, Bhutan didn't have the resources to invent and introduce a whole new education system that's fitting for our own culture. But we borrowed what was there in India, and India had it from the British Raj. So by the time it reached Bhutan, it was already obsolete in the UK and places where it came from. So what we ended up with having a fairly obsolete exogenous, an external education system imposed on a local culture, and even the medium was initially Hindi, which then got turned into English. So people like us, we went to school learning everything in English, except for one session in the whole day. So today you ask a young Bhutanese to write a letter in a local Bhutanese language, they cannot. I can tell you, 90% of the educated Bhutanese, literate Bhutanese, cannot write an elegant letter in the local languages. So while it is good that we have the literacy rate going up, we have new writers booming for our population at least, lot of the new literature is written in English, a foreign language to a Bhutanese child. So what most of the young Bhutanese go through, and I think this is true also to India to a great extent, you have two different worlds that you live in simultaneously. Within the classroom walls, you're living a modern Western world in the medium of English, mainly. And then outside those classroom walls, you're living the local Bhutanese life, speaking the local languages. So you grow up with a very fragmented personality. There's a great deal of emotional, psychological fragmentation in the young people, and a great deal of insecurity as a result. There's lack of resilience, very easily giving up to frustrations and temptations. So this is a question that I can turn Dr. Chadromo and Dr. Inzin. As we put down Bhutanese oral stories in English, a foreign language, how much are we doing? I mean, we are doing great work in terms of saving the story, but are we saving the cultural components? Are we doing justice to the children, bringing our own heritage through a sort of a roundabout detour using a foreign language? My personal feeling is we could do better by perhaps writing them down in the local Bhutanese languages, particularly Dzongkha, the national language, and then maybe enhancing the Dzongkha literacy in the schools.
Well, yes, I totally agree with what Dr. Karmafinsu had to say. As a contemporary writer, this is one big challenge that I always face. I'll come to his question later. I'll just first deal with the challenges that I, as a writer, writing in English for Bhutanese children, am facing. I already narrated why I became a writer. I wanted to pen down the folktales because I didn't want to lose those folktales. I wanted our Bhutanese children to know it. As Dr. Karmafinsu put it, our education system itself is, done in such a way that we have more of English than our own language. So, as somebody who has come through that system, I cannot help but be a part of that system. But at the same time, my conscience is very clear. Earlier, when they were having the session on biography, one panelist mentioned that as a writer, we have to be responsible. And as a writer, I think I know my responsibility well, and I carry this responsibility in my heart. I know that my goal in writing these books is not to promote myself as a writer, but to tell stories of Bhutan. Because I told you that we grew up reading literature that came from outside, that came from India, that came from the Western world. Trust me, even now in this digital world where information is at the tips of your fingers, people still do not know where Bhutan is. When they see you in this weird looking dress, they ask us, where are we from? And then when we say Bhutan, the first thing is they would not know how to pronounce Bhutan well. And then they would go on to question, are you in India? No. Nepal? No. So you see, then we have to go on to the extent of saying, oh, we are from that country that, talks about GNH. And then everybody's like, oh yes, Bhutan, the happiness country. Thanks to GNH, people at least have now heard about Bhutan. But otherwise, it takes a hell lot of explanation to tell people where Bhutan is. And one agenda that I always keep in my mind when I'm writing my books is to, take Bhutan outside. Tell the stories that Bhutanese are, what we are, and then take it to outside the country. The other thing is, like when we were mentioning about the challenges, When I came up with my first few books, nowadays everybody is on social media, I am too. And our publication process works very differently from any other parts of the world. So I self-publish my books. I have a publishing house license and I self-publish all the books that I publish. And then the only way I can promote my books are through social media. So I put up a lot of posts on Facebook promoting my books. And then I saw a few comments here and there, you know, the young children, the Generation X or Generation Y, whatever you want to call them, saying that Bhutanese writers lack creativity. It was like a huge blow right on the nose when they said that. They can only write about GNH, they can only write about the stuff that they are writing. That is cliched. I didn't make any comments here. But then I talked within our writers' circle, I talked about it. And to these children who are still growing up reading the literature from outside, creativity for them means vampires, unicorns, fairies and castles. And we don't have them in Bhutan. So that is why, over lunch, Chindu here, we were sitting together and then he asked me, what genre do you write? And I had a tough time trying to explain to him. Because normally I say that I'm a jack of all trades. But then I have realized that no, I shouldn't be saying this. By saying this, I am limiting my own creativity. So what I'm doing is, then I realized that no, if our younger generation is asking for something different, but let me do it in such a way that there is